I sat in that sterile hearing room, fluorescent lights, buzzing overhead, watching my own brother destroy my life with lies. Marcus stood at the witness table, his voice steady and confident, as he told the three-judge panel that I had been illegally practicing law without a license. My parents sat in the gallery behind him, nodding in agreement with every word. The presiding judge, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, opened my thick file and began reading. Then something strange happened. She stopped breathing for a moment, looked up at me with recognition dawning in her expression, and said words that would change everything that day. The nightmare started 6 months earlier when I walked across that graduation stage at UCLA Law School. I still remember the weight of my diploma in my hands, the culmination of 7 years of grinding work that began when I was 21 and laying concrete for 12 hours a day. Most people don't know that story. They see the expensive suit I wear to court now and assume I came from money. But the truth is, I spent 3 years mixing cement and pouring driveways just to save enough for community college tuition. My family never believed I could do it. When I scored high enough on my practice LSATs to transfer from community college to a 4-year university, my mother, Angela, just shook her head and said I was setting myself up for disappointment. My father, Robert, who worked as a mechanic for 30 years, told me that people like us don't become lawyers. But it was Marcus who hurt the most. My older brother, the golden child, who built a successful consulting business, by age 25 would laugh whenever I mentioned my law school plans at family dinners. "Come on, Brendan," he'd say, cutting into his steak while our parents watched approvingly. "You barely graduated high school. Law school is for people who actually read books." The table would fall silent, and I'd feel that familiar knot in my stomach that had been there since childhood whenever Marcus decided to remind everyone of my academic struggles. But I proved them wrong. I graduated magna cum laude from USC and scored in the 95th percentile on the California bar exam. When I called to share the news that I'd passed, my mother's response was a hesitant, "That's nice, honey," followed by an uncomfortable pause. Marcus congratulated me, but I could hear the disbelief in his voice, like he was waiting for me to admit it was all an elaborate joke. The real trouble started when I landed my position at Hartwell Singh & Associates, one of Los Angeles' most prestigious criminal defense firms. The managing partner, Jennifer Hartwell, had personally recruited me after seeing my law review article on Fourth Amendment protections in digital searches. Within 6 months, I was handling major felony cases and earning more money than anyone in my family had ever imagined possible. That should have been a celebration, but instead it became a source of suspicion. At my nephew's birthday party last November, Marcus cornered me by the dessert table and started interrogating me about my work. He wanted to know how much I was really making, whether the firm was legitimate, and if I was sure I understood what I was doing. When I showed him photos from a courtroom victory celebration with my colleagues, he studied them like he was looking for evidence of forgery. "It just doesn't add up," he told our cousin Danny that night, loud enough for me to overhear. 3 years ago, he was spreading asphalt. Now he's supposedly some hotshot lawyer. Something's not right about this whole thing. The whispers started small, but grew louder with each family gathering. My parents began asking strange questions about my cases, wanting to know specific details about legal procedures that seemed designed to trip me up. When I won my first major case last January defending a small business owner against tax fraud charges, Marcus's reaction wasn't congratulations but increased scrutiny. "Show me the court documents," he demanded when I mentioned the victory at Sunday dinner. "I want to see proof that you actually argued this case yourself." I brought the paperwork the following week, thinking it would finally convince him. Instead, Marcus spent an hour examining every page with a magnifying glass, looking for signs that I had somehow fabricated the evidence of my success. When he couldn't find any obvious problems, he shifted tactics. "These could be fake," he announced to the table. "Anyone with a computer and a printer could make documents that look official. I bet if we called the courthouse, they'd have no record of any case with Brendan's name on it." That's when I should have walked away. Instead, I made the mistake of trying to prove myself further. I invited Marcus to attend one of my court appearances, thinking that seeing me in action would finally convince him I was legitimate. He agreed, but when the day came, he spent the entire proceeding taking notes and photos, like he was gathering evidence for some future expose. Afterward, instead of admitting he was wrong, Marcus became more convinced than ever that I was running some kind of elaborate scam. He started researching my law school, my bar exam results, and even my undergraduate transcripts, claiming he was just trying to protect the family from whatever scheme I was obviously orchestrating. The breaking point came in March, when Marcus hired a private investigator named Sullivan to look into my background. I only found out about it when Sullivan called my law school's registrar office, claiming to be conducting a routine employment verification. The registrar was confused because my firm had already verified my credentials months earlier, so she called me directly to ask what was going on. When I confronted Marcus about hiring an investigator, he didn't even try to deny it. We were standing in our parents' driveway after another tense Sunday dinner, and he looked me straight in the eye and said, "If you're legitimate, you have nothing to worry about. But if you're lying about any of this, I'm going to expose you before you embarrass this family any further." "Marcus, this is insane," I told him, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm your brother. Why would you think I'm lying about being a lawyer?" "Because it's impossible," he shot back. "You were barely functional in high school. You couldn't even pass algebra without tutoring. And now you want me to believe you're arguing cases in front of judges. Give me a break." That conversation ended with Marcus storming into the house and me driving home with shaking hands, finally understanding that nothing I accomplished would ever be enough to change his mind about who I was supposed to be in his narrative of our family. The private investigator's report came back 3 weeks later, confirming every detail of my education and legal credentials. But instead of apologizing, Marcus accused Sullivan of being part of the conspiracy, claiming I must have paid him off to produce a fake report. That's when I knew this wasn't really about my qualifications. This was about Marcus needing to believe that his little brother couldn't possibly have achieved something he couldn't control or diminish. Marcus's campaign against me escalated from family whispers to official action with the methodical precision of someone who believed he was performing a public service. In April, he contacted UCLA Law School directly demanding they provide him with copies of my transcripts and proof that I had actually attended classes. When the registrar informed him that student records are confidential and could only be released to me or employers with my written consent, Marcus became furious. "My brother is committing fraud using your school's name." He told the registrar during a recorded phone call that I later obtained through a public records request. "I have a right to know if he actually graduated or if he's just claiming he did to steal money from innocent clients." The registrar patiently explained that I had indeed graduated with honors, that my academic record was exemplary, and that the school stood behind all its alumni. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with verbal confirmation. He demanded written documentation, threatened to contact the American Bar Association, and even suggested that the entire law school might be operating a diploma mill. When UCLA's administration refused to violate my privacy rights, Marcus shifted his focus to the California State Bar itself. He filed a formal complaint in May, alleging that I had forged my bar exam results and was practicing law without a valid license. The complaint was 12 pages long, single-spaced, and filled with conspiracy theories about how I had supposedly manipulated the entire legal system. I learned about the state bar investigation on a Wednesday morning that I'll never forget. I was preparing for a pre-trial hearing when my phone rang, and Jennifer Hartwell's voice was tight with concern. "Brendan, I need you in my office immediately," she said. "Bring whatever documentation you have about your bar admission and law school graduation." The walk down the hall to her corner office felt like the longest 30 seconds of my life. Jennifer was sitting behind her mahogany desk with a letter from the state bar spread out in front of her, and her usual warm demeanor had been replaced by careful, professional distance. The bar received allegations about your credentials, she said without preamble. They're conducting a formal investigation, and until it's resolved, I have to place you on administrative leave. The words hit me like a physical blow. Administrative leave meant no client contact, no court appearances, and no salary. It meant my colleagues would whisper about what I might have done wrong. It meant the career I had worked so hard to build could disappear based on my brother's paranoid fantasies. "Jennifer, this is my brother who filed the complaint," I tried to explain. "He's been obsessed with proving I'm somehow fake ever since I started working here. None of this is true." She held up her hand to stop me. "Brendan, I believe you. I've seen your work, and I know you're an excellent attorney. But I also have to protect this firm's reputation. Once the bar clears you, which I'm confident they will, we'll discuss your return." That was the most professional way anyone had ever told me my life was falling apart. The investigation moved quickly once it began. State bar investigators interviewed my law school professors, reviewed my bar exam scores, and examined court records from every case I had handled. They spoke to opposing counsel judges and clients trying to find any evidence that I was unqualified or had misrepresented my credentials in any way. Every interview came back positive. Professor Martinez from my constitutional law class told investigators that I was one of the most insightful students he had taught in 20 years. Judge Harrison, before whom I had argued 3 cases, called my legal work exceptional and expressed surprise that anyone would question my qualifications. Even prosecutors who had faced me in court vouched for my competence and professionalism. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with the bar's preliminary findings. When investigators told him they had found no evidence supporting his allegations, he accused them of being part of the cover-up. He hired a second private investigator, then a third, firing each one when they confirmed that my credentials were legitimate. Meanwhile, Marcus convinced our parents to submit their own sworn statements supporting his complaint. Angela wrote a tearful 3-page letter describing how shocked she was to learn about my supposed deception, claiming she had always known I wasn't smart enough to become a lawyer. Robert's statement was shorter, but equally damaging, asserting that I had been lying to the family for years and that he feared I might be stealing money from clients. The impact on my personal life was devastating. My girlfriend Sarah, who I had been dating for 2 years, began questioning whether she really knew me. At dinner one night in June, she asked me to show her my law school diploma, and when I pulled it from my home office, she examined it like she was looking for signs of forgery. "I'm not saying I don't believe you," she said carefully, "but your own family thinks you're lying. That has to mean something, right?" I realized then that Marcus's campaign wasn't just destroying my professional reputation. It was poisoning every relationship I had built, making people wonder if the man they thought they knew was actually an elaborate fiction. The local media picked up the story in July when a reporter at the Los Angeles Tribune received an anonymous tip about the fake lawyer investigation. The resulting article was only 6 paragraphs long, but it identified me by name and described the allegations in sensational terms. Within hours, the story was being shared on social media with comments from people who had never met me, but were convinced I was a criminal mastermind who had somehow fooled an entire law school, the state bar, and multiple judges. My law school classmates reached out with messages of support, but their concern only emphasized how surreal the situation had become. These were people who had sat next to me in lectures, studied with me in the library, and watched me graduate. Yet here they were having to defend my existence to a world that was beginning to doubt I was who I claimed to be. The breaking point in my relationship with my family came during a confrontation at their house in August. I had driven there with copies of every document that proved my credentials, hoping to finally end Marcus's crusade. I spread my law school transcripts, bar exam results, and court records across their kitchen table, desperately trying to make them see reason. "Look at this," I pleaded with my parents. "My grades, my test scores, Testimonials from professors who taught me for 3 years. How could all of this be fake? Marcus barely glanced at the paperwork before dismissing it all as sophisticated forgeries. Anyone with the right software can make documents that look official, he said. These prove nothing except that you've gotten really good at creating fake evidence. That's when Angela started crying and said the words that still haunt me. I just don't know what to believe anymore, Brendan. You used to be such an honest boy. When did you become someone who lies about everything? I looked around that kitchen table at the 3 people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and I realized they had already decided I was guilty. No amount of evidence would change their minds because admitting they were wrong would mean confronting the uncomfortable truth that they had never really believed in me in the first place. The final twist came when I discovered Marcus had been recording our conversations during family visits. I only learned about it when he submitted edited versions of those recordings to the state bar as additional evidence of my supposed guilt. The edited clips made it sound like I was admitting to fraud when in reality, I had been expressing frustration about being falsely accused. In one recording, Marcus had asked me, "Don't you think it's time to come clean about all this?" My response was, "I can't keep living this lie," referring to the lie that I was somehow an imposter in my own life. But Marcus edited out his question, making it sound like I was confessing to being a fraud. When the state bar received those manipulated recordings in September, they scheduled a formal disciplinary hearing for October 15th. I would have to sit before a 3-judge panel and defend not just my credentials, but my entire identity against the testimony of my own family members who seemed determined to destroy me. October 15th dawned gray and cold, with the kind of Los Angeles drizzle that makes everything feel ominous. I arrived at the state bar building downtown 2 hours early, unable to sleep, and desperate to review my defense materials one more time. The imposing glass structure seemed to loom over me as I sat in my car, watching other attorneys enter with the confident stride of people who belonged in that world. I wondered if I would still be one of them by the end of the day. The hearing room on the 14th floor was smaller than I had expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows on everything. 3 judges sat at an elevated bench, Judge Patricia Williams in the center, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, flanked by Judge David Chen and Judge Maria Santos. Their black robes and stern expressions made them look like sentries guarding the gates of my profession. My court-appointed attorney Thomas Brennan was a thin man in his 50s who specialized in disciplinary cases. During our brief preparation sessions, he had seemed distracted and overwhelmed, asking basic questions about my background that suggested he hadn't thoroughly reviewed my file. When I tried to explain the family dynamics behind the accusations, his eyes glazed over like he was mentally organizing his grocery list. Just answer their questions directly, he advised me that morning. Don't volunteer information and try not to seem defensive. These cases usually resolve themselves once the facts come out. I wasn't reassured by his casual confidence, especially when I saw the state bar prosecutor Diana Walsh arrive with 3 boxes of evidence and a presentation remote. She was young, probably early 30s, with the hungry look of someone trying to make her reputation on high-profile cases. This wasn't routine paperwork to her. This was an opportunity to expose what she believed was a sophisticated fraud. The gallery filled slowly with spectators, including 2 reporters from legal publications and several law students who had come to observe the proceedings. Then my family arrived and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus wore his best navy suit and carried a leather portfolio thick with documents. Angela and Robert flanked him like bodyguards, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. Marcus didn't look at me as they took their seats in the front row, but I could feel his presence like a weight on my chest. This was the moment he had been building toward for months. His chance to prove to the world that his little brother was everything he had always said I was: a fraud, a disappointment, and a liar. Judge Williams called the hearing to order at 9:30 sharp, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation like a blade. She read the charges against me in a flat, professional tone. Allegations of practicing law without a valid license, misrepresenting credentials to clients and courts, and engaging in fraudulent conduct that violated multiple sections of the state bar's rules of professional conduct. Diana Walsh opened with a presentation that would have been impressive if it hadn't been built on lies. She displayed a timeline of my supposed deception, complete with charts and graphs that made my legitimate career look like an elaborate criminal enterprise. According to her theory, I had been systematically fooling everyone from law school admissions officers to superior court judges for over 4 years. The evidence will show, she announced to the panel, that the respondent has built his entire professional identity on fabricated credentials and forged documents. His own family members, people who have known him his entire life, will testify that his claims of legal education and bar admission are completely inconsistent with his actual abilities and background. Then Marcus took the witness stand, and I watched my own brother transform into the most convincing liar I had ever seen. He spoke with calm authority about my academic struggles, my limited intellectual capabilities, and his growing suspicions about my supposed legal career. He presented his timeline of red flags from my sudden transformation from construction worker to law student to my allegedly impossible success at a prestigious firm. "Your Honor," Marcus said, looking directly at Judge Williams, "I've known my brother for 28 years. I've seen him struggle with basic math, watched him fail multiple classes in high school, and witnessed his complete lack of interest in reading or intellectual pursuits. The idea that this same person could graduate from law school, pass the bar exam, and handle complex criminal cases is simply not credible." He pulled out printed screenshots of my law firm's website, pointing to my professional photo and biography like they were evidence of a crime. "This whole persona is a fiction," he continued. "He's created this elaborate story about academic achievement and legal success, but it's all built on lies. I believe he's been impersonating a licensed attorney and potentially stealing money from clients who think they're hiring a qualified lawyer." The recording equipment played the edited conversations Marcus had secretly captured, and in the context of the hearing room, they sounded damning. My voice filled the space, seemingly admitting to living a lie and expressing frustration about keeping up a deception. Without the full context of our conversations, the recordings made me sound like a guilty man finally cracking under pressure. During cross-examination, Thomas Brennan asked a few weak questions about Marcus's motives for investigating me, but he failed to challenge the credibility of the recordings or expose the suspicious timing of Marcus's sudden concern about my career. When Marcus mentioned hiring private investigators, Brennan didn't ask why those investigators had confirmed my credentials or why Marcus had fired them when they didn't find evidence of fraud. Angela testified next, and her tears seemed genuine as she described her shock and disappointment at learning about my supposed deception. She painted a picture of a troubled young man who had always exaggerated his accomplishments and who she now believed had finally taken his lies too far. "I blamed myself," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I thought maybe if I had been a better mother, if I'd pushed him harder in school, he wouldn't have felt the need to create these fantasies about being successful. But when I saw how elaborate his lies had become, how many people he was fooling, I knew I had to speak up." The state bar prosecutor played excerpts from my parents' written statements, highlighting their assertions that I lacked the intelligence and education necessary to become a lawyer. Robert's statement was read aloud in his own words. "Brendan has always been a dreamer who lived in fantasy worlds. We should have seen the signs earlier that he was capable of this kind of elaborate deception. By lunch break, the case against me looked overwhelming. 3 family members had testified under oath that I was a fraud supported by recordings that seemed to capture me admitting to deception. The prosecutor had presented what appeared to be a clear pattern of misrepresentation stretching back years. I ate a sandwich in the courthouse cafeteria, but the food tasted like sawdust in my mouth. Thomas Brennan tried to reassure me that the afternoon would go better when we presented my documentation and character witnesses, but his confidence seemed forced. At the next table, two law students were discussing my case, speculating about how I had managed to fool so many people for so long. "It's actually kind of brilliant," one of them said. He must have studied real lawyers to learn how to act like one. The guy's basically a method actor who convinced everyone he was playing himself. I excused myself and spent the rest of lunch break in a bathroom stall, trying to compose myself for the afternoon session that would determine whether I had any future in the profession I had worked so hard to enter. When court reconvened at 1:15, Judge Williams looked tired, like she was already mentally writing the order that would end my career. Judge Chen was reviewing documents with the focused attention of someone looking for any detail that might support the prosecution's case. Judge Santos seemed sympathetic but confused, occasionally glancing at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. The prosecutor's final witness was a handwriting expert who had analyzed my law school transcripts and bar exam results, looking for signs of forgery or alteration. His testimony was technical and boring, but his conclusion was clear. While he couldn't prove the documents were fake, he also couldn't definitively verify their authenticity given the sophisticated technology available for document creation. In my professional opinion, he said these documents could be genuine, but they could also be very high-quality reproductions created by someone with access to the right equipment and templates. That testimony felt like the final nail in my coffin. Even my legitimate credentials were being treated as suspicious, viewed through the lens of Marcus's accusations rather than evaluated on their own merit. I looked at the three judges and saw doubt in their eyes, the reasonable uncertainty that would justify ending my career to protect the public from a potential fraud. But then something unexpected happened. Judge Williams opened my complete file, the one containing all my case records and court appearances, and her expression changed. She studied a photograph clipped to the inside cover, then looked at me with recognition dawning in her eyes. Her hand stopped moving across the page, and for a long moment the entire courtroom held its breath. "Mr. Eduardo," she said slowly, using the wrong name but clearly recognizing someone. "You argued before me last year, the Fitzgerald case." The prosecutor stopped mid-sentence in her closing argument. Marcus's confident expression faltered. The entire room focused on Judge Williams as she continued to study my file with increasing intensity. I called it the most brilliant defense I had seen in 30 years. She said, her voice carrying a note of confusion that would change everything. "Why is your family claiming you're not a licensed attorney?" The silence that followed Judge Williams's words was deafening. I watched Marcus's face drain of color as he processed what the judge had just said. His confident posture crumpled like a house of cards, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. The prosecutor, Diana Walsh, looked like someone had just told her the earth was actually flat, blinking rapidly as she tried to reconcile this unexpected development with her carefully constructed case. Judge Williams set down my file and removed her reading glasses, studying my face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Mr. Castillo," she said, correcting herself and using my actual name, "I remember you clearly now. The Fitzgerald murder case. You defended that young man who was falsely accused of killing his girlfriend. Your opening statement was masterful, and your cross-examination of the prosecution's key witness completely dismantled their case." She turned to address the other judges, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Colleagues, I personally witnessed this attorney's work in my courtroom. His legal knowledge, his courtroom presence, his ethical conduct throughout a highly charged case. There is absolutely no question that Mr. Castillo is a licensed, competent attorney who has practiced before this court with distinction." Judge Chen leaned forward, suddenly interested. "The Fitzgerald case, I remember reading about that in the legal journals. Wasn't that the case where new DNA evidence proved the defendant's innocence? It was Judge Williams confirmed. But that evidence would never have been admissible without Mr. Castillo's motion to compel testing of previously ignored samples. His research into similar cases and his constitutional arguments were textbook examples of effective criminal defense work. Marcus jumped to his feet, his voice cracking with desperation. "Your Honor, that's impossible. There must be some mistake. Maybe my brother was impersonating someone else? Or maybe he hired another lawyer to argue the case while he pretended to be in court. He could never have handled a murder case. He barely graduated high school." Judge Williams fixed Marcus with a stare that could have frozen lava. "Mr. Castillo, I am looking at the man who stood before my bench and delivered one of the most compelling closing arguments I have heard in 30 years of judicial service. There is no possibility of mistaken identity. I remember his face, his voice, and most importantly, his exceptional legal work." She gestured to the court clerk. "Please bring me the complete file from People v. Fitzgerald case number BA4567892. I want the video recordings of Mr. Castillo's arguments played for this panel." The 15-minute recess that followed felt like the longest quarter hour of my life. Court staff scrambled to locate the Fitzgerald case files while the gallery buzzed with confused whispers. I could see reporters frantically texting their editors, trying to figure out how to rewrite the story they thought they were covering. Sarah, who had arrived during the lunch break to support me, squeezed my hand with tears in her eyes. "I never doubted you," she whispered, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "I'm so sorry I let them make me question what I knew about you." Marcus sat with his head in his hands, surrounded by our parents, who looked bewildered and increasingly panicked. Angela kept glancing between Marcus and me like she was seeing both of her sons clearly for the first time in years. Robert's face had gone ashen, and he was staring at his hands like he couldn't bear to look at anyone else in the room. When court reconvened, the clerk had set up a large monitor visible to everyone in the courtroom. Judge Williams announced that they would review selected portions of my work in the Fitzgerald case to establish my credentials definitively. The first video showed me delivering my opening statement to a packed courtroom, my voice clear and confident as I outlined the defense strategy. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," my recorded voice filled the hearing room. "The prosecution wants you to believe that David Fitzgerald is a cold-blooded killer who murdered the woman he loved. But the evidence will show that David is actually the victim of a rush to judgment by investigators who were more interested in closing a high-profile case than finding the truth." Judge Chen nodded approvingly as the video continued. "That's sophisticated legal argument," he murmured to Judge Santos. "Look at how he's previewing the evidence while establishing reasonable doubt. This isn't amateur work." The second video showed my cross-examination of the prosecution's star witness, a supposed eyewitness whose testimony I had systematically destroyed through careful questioning that revealed inconsistencies in his story and his motivation to lie. My technique was methodical and professional, building to a climactic moment, where the witness finally admitted he hadn't actually seen anything and had invented his testimony to avoid drug charges. "Mr. Patterson," my recorded voice asked, "isn't it true that you told police you saw my client at the scene only after Detective Morrison promised to help you avoid prosecution for possession of methamphetamine with intent to distribute?" The witness's breakdown on video was complete and devastating. Marcus watched his entire worldview collapse as the recordings proved beyond any doubt that I was not only a legitimate attorney, but an exceptionally skilled one. The final video was my closing argument, which Judge Williams had called brilliant. I watched myself pace before the jury, weaving together evidence and legal precedent into a compelling narrative that had ultimately freed an innocent man. "The prosecution has asked you to convict David Fitzgerald based on suspicion, circumstantial evidence, and the false testimony of a witness who admitted on this stand that he lied to avoid his own criminal charges. my recorded voice declared. But our system of justice demands more than suspicion. It demands proof beyond reasonable doubt, and that proof simply does not exist in this case. When the videos ended, the courtroom remained silent except for the sound of Angela crying quietly in the front row. Judge Williams addressed the panel with crisp authority. Having reviewed Mr. Castillo's documented legal work, I move to immediately dismiss all charges against him. The evidence clearly establishes that he is a licensed attorney in good standing, who has practiced with competence and distinction before this court. But Diana Walsh wasn't ready to surrender. Your Honors, while Mr. Castillo may be licensed now, the family's allegations suggest he fraudulently obtained his credentials initially. Perhaps he cheated on the bar exam or somehow manipulated the law school admissions process. Judge Santos shook her head. Counselor, we just watched recordings of sophisticated legal work that demonstrates years of education and training. No one could fake that level of knowledge and skill. These recordings prove Mr. Castillo's competence beyond any reasonable doubt. The prosecutor's case was collapsing in real time, and everyone in the room could see it. But the most dramatic moment was still to come. Judge Williams called for a brief sidebar with her colleagues, and their whispered conference lasted only 2 minutes before she returned to address the courtroom with barely controlled anger. This hearing is based on false allegations that have wasted this court's time and damaged the reputation of a competent attorney, she announced. Before we dismiss these charges, I want to understand how we arrived at this point. Mr. Marcus Castillo, you have testified under oath that your brother is a fraud. You have presented edited recordings as evidence. You have convinced your parents to file false statements with the state bar. I want to know why. Marcus stammered something about protecting the family and preventing fraud, but his explanation sounded hollow even to him. Judge Williams wasn't satisfied. Bailiff, please contact the district attorney's office. I want someone here immediately to discuss potential charges for perjury, filing false reports, and tampering with evidence. These recordings appear to have been deliberately edited to misrepresent the content of conversations. That's when the second stunning revelation emerged. The court's audio technician, who had been analyzing Marcus's recordings during the sidebar conference, reported that digital analysis showed clear evidence of manipulation. The recordings had been edited with sophisticated software to remove context and create false impressions of guilt. Your Honor, the technician reported, these recordings have been heavily altered. Portions have been deleted, segments have been rearranged, and in at least 2 instances, words have been digitally spliced together to create statements that never actually occurred. Marcus's face went white as the full implications hit him. He wasn't just wrong about my credentials. He was facing potential felony charges for evidence tampering and filing false reports. The family crusade that had consumed his life for months was about to destroy his own future instead of mine. Judge Williams ordered an immediate investigation into Marcus's conduct, including his hiring of multiple private investigators and his campaign to spread false information about my professional credentials. She also ordered the state bar to examine whether Marcus had committed crimes that warranted referral to federal authorities for prosecution. The hearing that had begun with my career hanging in the balance had become Marcus's day of reckoning. As bailiffs prepared to take him into custody for questioning, he finally looked at me across the courtroom with something that might have been regret. I just couldn't believe it, he said, his voice breaking. I couldn't believe you had actually done something I couldn't do. The investigation into Marcus's conduct moved with the swift efficiency of a system finally focused on actual misconduct rather than fabricated allegations. Within hours of Judge Williams's order, state bar investigators were examining Marcus's phone records, financial transactions, and communications with the private investigators he had hired. What they discovered painted a picture of obsession and deception that went far beyond family jealousy. The first breakthrough came when investigators analyzed the complete audio files from Marcus's recordings. The original, unedited conversations revealed the true context of every statement he had manipulated. In one recording, when Marcus asked if I was tired of living a lie, my complete response was, "I'm tired of living the lie that I have to prove myself to you constantly. I'm tired of pretending that your approval matters more than the truth about what I've accomplished." Marcus had edited out everything except, "I'm tired of living the lie," making it sound like a confession of fraud rather than an expression of frustration about his constant doubt. Similar manipulations appeared throughout the recordings, creating a false narrative of guilt from conversations that actually demonstrated my innocence and his paranoia. The second revelation was even more damning. Phone records showed that Marcus had contacted 17 different media outlets over 6 months, trying to interest reporters in what he called the fake lawyer scandal. Most had ignored him, but he had persisted with increasingly elaborate theories about my supposed deception. In one voicemail to a legal journalist, Marcus claimed I was part of a larger conspiracy involving multiple people impersonating attorneys. Bank records revealed that Marcus had spent over $40,000 investigating me, hiring 3 private investigators, and paying for digital forensics analysis of my law school records. When the first investigator, Robert Sullivan, confirmed that my credentials were legitimate, Marcus fired him and demanded a refund. When the second investigator reached the same conclusion, Marcus accused him of being bribed and threatened to report him to state licensing authorities. The third investigator, Derek Hansen, had actually warned Marcus that his allegations appeared to be unfounded and that continuing to pursue them could expose him to legal liability. Marcus's response, captured in email exchanges obtained by state bar investigators, was to accuse Hansen of being part of the cover-up and to threaten him with a lawsuit for participating in fraud. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators examined Marcus's business practices. The consulting firm he had built his reputation on was revealed to be a sophisticated financial fraud scheme involving embezzlement from client accounts, falsified tax documents, and money laundering through offshore accounts. The very crimes he had accused me of committing were ones he had been perpetrating for years. IRS agents arrived at the courthouse before the day's session ended, carrying boxes of evidence and federal warrants for Marcus's arrest. Agent Patricia Coleman explained to Judge Williams that they had been investigating Marcus's business for 8 months as part of a larger investigation into corporate fraud schemes. His obsession with discrediting me had actually led investigators to examine his own activities, more closely revealing the criminal enterprise he had been running. Mr. Marcus Castillo has stolen approximately $2.3 million from his clients over the past 4 years, Agent Coleman reported. He created false investment accounts, forged financial statements, and used new client investments to pay returns to existing clients in a classic Ponzi scheme. His attacks on his brother appear to have been motivated by fear that increased scrutiny of the family would expose his own criminal activities. The irony was devastating. Marcus had spent months trying to prove I was a fraud, while he was actually running a criminal operation that had destroyed dozens of families' financial security. His righteous crusade against my supposed deception had been projection of the massive deception he was perpetrating every day. Angela took the witness stand again that afternoon, but this time she was testifying as a victim of her older son's crimes rather than as a supporter of his allegations. Through tears, she revealed that Marcus had convinced her and Robert to invest their retirement savings in his fake investment fund. They had lost nearly $200,000 money Marcus had stolen to finance his investigation of me and to maintain his fraudulent lifestyle. "I don't understand any of this," Angela sobbed. Marcus was always the successful one, the one we were proud of. He told us Brendan was lying about everything, and we believed him because we trusted him. Now we find out that Marcus was the liar all along and he stole our life savings while making us think Brendan was the criminal. Robert's testimony was even more heartbreaking. He described how Marcus had gradually isolated him and Angela from me, convincing them that any contact with me was dangerous because I might involve them in whatever criminal scheme he claimed I was running. Marcus had monitored their phone calls, read their mail, and convinced them to change their wills to exclude me from any inheritance. He said Brendan was going to destroy the family reputation. Robert testified, his voice shaking with emotion. He made us believe that supporting Brendan meant we were helping a criminal. We stopped talking to our own son because we trusted the wrong one. The final piece of evidence came from Marcus himself. Faced with overwhelming evidence of his financial crimes and the collapse of his case against me, he finally broke down and confessed to Agent Coleman. The confession played in open court revealed the depths of his jealousy and the elaborate lies he had constructed to justify his behavior. I couldn't stand that Brendan was actually successful. Marcus's voice filled the courtroom through the recording equipment. He was supposed to be the failure. He was supposed to need me to succeed. When he became a lawyer and started making more money than me, it destroyed everything I believed about our family and about myself. I thought if I could prove he was fake, then everything would go back to the way it was supposed to be. The confession continued with Marcus admitting that he had known his allegations were false, but had convinced himself that I must be hiding some other crime that would justify his investigation. When he couldn't find any evidence of wrongdoing, he began manufacturing it, editing recordings, and pressuring our parents to support his narrative. I told myself I was protecting the family, Marcus said in the recording. But really, I was just trying to protect my ego. I couldn't accept that my little brother had surpassed me honestly while I was building my success on lies and stolen money. Judge Williams listened to the confession with an expression of disgust that encompassed not just Marcus's crimes, but the waste of resources and damage to my reputation that his false allegations had caused. When the recording ended, she addressed the courtroom with cold fury. This case represents one of the most malicious abuses of the disciplinary process I have seen in 25 years on this bench, she declared. Mr. Brendan Castillo's reputation has been damaged by false allegations filed by a family member who was himself engaged in serious criminal conduct. This court apologizes to Mr. Castillo for the ordeal he has endured based on these fabricated charges. The dismissal of all charges against me was swift and complete. Judge Williams expunged the entire proceeding from my record and ordered the state bar to issue a public statement clearing my name and confirming my standing as an attorney in good standing. She also recommended that I be considered for commendation for maintaining my professionalism and integrity throughout the investigation. But the most satisfying moment came when federal agents led Marcus away in handcuffs. As they passed my table, he stopped and looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Brendan," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for everything." I looked at my brother, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. "I forgive you, Marcus," I replied, "but I'll never forget what you were willing to do to me." As the courtroom emptied, I sat at the defendant's table with Sarah and Thomas Brennan, watching the reporters rush out to file their corrected stories. The nightmare was over, but the damage to my family relationships would take much longer to repair. Jennifer Hartwell appeared at my side as I gathered my documents, her smile warm but apologetic. "Brendan, I want you back at work Monday morning," she said. "And I want to discuss making you a junior partner. What you've been through would have broken most people, but you maintained your dignity throughout. That's exactly the kind of character we want representing our firm." The vindication was sweet, but it was shadowed by the knowledge of how much pain Marcus's jealousy and criminal behavior had caused everyone he claimed to love. As I walked out of the courthouse with Sarah, I realized that winning this fight was just the beginning of a longer journey toward healing the wounds that months of false accusations had created. The aftermath of Marcus's arrest unfolded with the systematic precision of a justice system finally focused on actual crimes rather than fabricated allegations. Within 72 hours of his confession, federal prosecutors had filed a 37-count indictment charging him with wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The scope of his criminal enterprise was staggering, involving over 200 victims and spanning 4 states. Marcus's consulting business, which had been the foundation of his supposed success and the source of his arrogance toward me, collapsed overnight. Clients who had trusted him with their life savings discovered they had been funding a Ponzi scheme that used their investments to pay earlier investors while Marcus skimmed millions for personal use. The luxury cars, expensive watches, and upscale lifestyle that had impressed our parents were all purchased with stolen money. The media coverage shifted dramatically from the fake lawyer story to the much more compelling narrative of a successful businessman whose jealousy of his brother had exposed his own massive fraud. Legal journalists, who had initially covered my disciplinary hearing as a curiosity about credential fraud, now wrote extensive pieces about prosecutorial overreach and the dangers of accepting accusations without proper investigation. The Los Angeles Tribune, which had published the original article questioning my credentials, ran a front-page story with the headline, "Real Fraud Was the Accuser Brother's Jealousy Exposes $1 Million Scam." The article detailed Marcus's criminal activities and included quotes from Judge Williams praising my legal work and condemning the waste of judicial resources on fabricated charges. My law firm not only welcomed me back, but made me the centerpiece of their response to the scandal. Jennifer Hartwell called a press conference to announce my promotion to junior partner and to emphasize the firm's confidence in my abilities and character. She used the opportunity to highlight how I had maintained my professionalism throughout the ordeal, never lashing out at my accusers or compromising my ethical standards despite facing career destruction. "Brendan Castillo represents everything we value in the legal profession," Jennifer told the assembled reporters. His response to false accusations was to trust in the truth and work within the system to clear his name. That kind of integrity under pressure is exactly what our clients deserve from their legal representation. The State Bar went beyond simply clearing my record. They issued an unprecedented public apology for allowing the investigation to proceed as far as it did without more thoroughly examining the credibility of the accusations. Bar President Catherine Morrison personally called to express regret for the damage to my reputation and to invite me to join the organization's ethics committee. "Your experience highlights important flaws in our complaint investigation process," she explained during our conversation. "We want you to help us develop better procedures to prevent legitimate attorneys from being subjected to malicious or frivolous allegations in the future." The offer to serve on the ethics committee was both an honor and an opportunity for meaningful reform. I accepted knowing that my experience could help protect other attorneys from similar ordeals while also demonstrating the resilience and commitment to justice that had sustained me through the investigation. Marcus's criminal trial was scheduled for the following spring, but his financial empire continued crumbling through the winter months. Civil lawsuits from defrauded clients piled up faster than his court-appointed attorneys could process them. His assets were frozen, his business licenses revoked, and his professional reputation destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. The most painful aspect of Marcus's downfall was its impact on our parents. Angela and Robert not only lost their retirement savings to his Ponzi scheme, but faced the humiliation of having supported his false accusations against me. The revelation that they had been manipulated by their criminal son while attacking their innocent son created a level of family trauma that would require years of healing. Angela entered therapy to process the guilt and confusion of having been deceived so completely by Marcus while doubting me without evidence. During one of our first conversations after the trial, she broke down completely. "I failed as a mother," she cried. "I believed the wrong son and hurt the innocent one." How do I live with that? How do you ever forgive me for what I did to you? The conversation took place in her living room, the same space where Marcus had convinced her to sign false statements about my character. Seeing her genuine anguish, I realized that she had been Marcus's victim, too manipulated by someone she trusted to betray someone she loved. Mom, Marcus spent months systematically convincing you I was dangerous, I told her. He used your love for this family and your fear of scandal to manipulate you into supporting his lies. You were deceived by an expert manipulator who happened to be your son. Robert's recovery was slower and more complicated. His blue-collar background had always made him suspicious of intellectual achievement, making Marcus's claims about my impossible success seem plausible. Learning that his successful businessman's son was actually a criminal, while his supposedly fraudulent son was legitimately accomplished, challenged fundamental assumptions about success and family that had guided his life for decades. The financial impact on my parents was severe but not devastating. I was able to help them recover some of their losses through restitution payments that would eventually come from Marcus's seized assets. More importantly, I began including them in my life again, inviting them to court proceedings where they could see me work, and gradually rebuilding their understanding of who I actually was. Sarah and I had emerged from the ordeal with a stronger relationship tested by external pressure, but ultimately strengthened by our commitment to each other. She had initially wavered when faced with my family's accusations, but her support during the hearing and her fierce defense of me afterward demonstrated the depth of her love and her growth in understanding manipulation tactics. I learned something important about myself during this whole nightmare. Mir, she told me one evening as we walked along the beach in Santa Monica. I'm stronger than I thought, but I'm also more susceptible to other people's opinions than I want to admit. I'll never let anyone make me doubt you again. We became engaged that Christmas in the same courthouse where my vindication had taken place. Judge Williams, who had become something of a mentor to me, performed the ceremony in her chambers with our closest friends and my reconciling family in attendance. The symbolism was powerful. A place where I had faced destruction had become the site of new beginnings. The most unexpected development was the establishment of the Castillo Legal Defense Fund, which I created to help other professionals facing false accusations from family members or personal acquaintances. The fund provided legal representation investigation services and emotional support for people dealing with malicious complaints designed to destroy their careers and reputations. The need for such services was greater than I had imagined. Within 6 months, the fund was handling 12 cases involving teachers, doctors, accountants, and other professionals whose success had inspired jealous family members or former friends to file false reports with licensing boards. Each case taught me something new about the psychology of betrayal and the importance of maintaining professional systems that could distinguish between legitimate concerns and personal vendettas. Marcus was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $4.7 million in restitution to his victims. His guilty plea spared everyone the trauma of a lengthy trial, but his allocution in court provided a final window into the mindset that had driven his destructive behavior. I convinced myself that my brother must be lying because I couldn't accept that he had achieved something honestly that I could only achieve through fraud, Marcus told the judge. I destroyed my family, hurt innocent people, and wasted the court's time because I couldn't face the truth about myself. I hope someday I can earn the forgiveness of the people I've hurt, starting with my brother. The sentencing provided closure to the legal proceedings, but the deeper work of family healing was just beginning. I visited Marcus in prison 6 months after his sentencing, not to forgive him, but to understand how our family dynamics had contributed to his destructive jealousy and to begin the long process of rebuilding some form of relationship. The conversation was awkward and painful, but it was a beginning. Marcus was participating in therapy, and seemed genuinely committed to understanding and changing the patterns of thought that had led to his criminal behavior. Whether he would emerge from prison as someone capable of healthy family relationships remained to be seen, but I was willing to give him the opportunity to prove he could change. 2 years have passed since that October morning when I sat in a disciplinary hearing room watching my own family try to destroy my career with lies. The intervening time has brought healing growth and a deeper understanding of both the fragility and resilience of family bonds. As I write this sitting in my corner office at Hartwell Singh and Associates, I can see the framed letter from Judge Williams commending my conduct during the investigation, alongside photos from my wedding to Sarah and certificates recognizing my work with the Legal Defense Fund. The practice of law has taken on new meaning for me since surviving Marcus's false accusations. Every client I represent, every case I argue carries the weight of knowing how quickly a career can be threatened by malicious lies, and how important it is to maintain integrity when facing unjust attacks. The Fitzgerald case, which Judge Williams had cited as evidence of my competence, became the foundation for my growing reputation as a criminal defense attorney who understands what it means to be wrongly accused. My caseload now includes several high-profile cases involving professionals accused of misconduct by former colleagues or family members with personal motives. The experience of being falsely accused has given me unique insight into the psychology of both accusers and defendants, helping me build more effective defense strategies while maintaining empathy for all parties involved. The Legal Defense Fund has grown beyond my initial expectations, handling over 40 cases in its first 2 years and achieving favorable outcomes in 36 of them. We've helped teachers falsely accused of inappropriate conduct by vindictive students, doctors, targeted by malpractice claims from family members seeking financial gain, and accountants facing ethics violations filed by business partners in disputed divorces. Each case reinforces the same fundamental truth: success and achievement often inspire jealousy that can manifest as destructive behavior from people who should be sources of support. The fund's work isn't just about legal defense, it's about helping victims understand the psychological dynamics of their situations and develop strategies for rebuilding their professional and personal relationships. Angela and Robert have become two of my strongest supporters. Their guilt about their initial doubt transformed into fierce pride in my achievements and advocacy for others facing similar ordeals. They attend Legal Defense Fund events as volunteer speakers, sharing their experience of being manipulated into supporting false accusations and encouraging other families to resist similar pressure. I want other parents to learn from our mistakes. Angela told an audience of lawyers and judges at last year's fund gala, "We let jealousy and manipulation poison our judgment about our own son. We're spending the rest of our lives making up for that failure, and we want to help other families avoid the pain we caused ourselves." Their recovery of stolen assets from Marcus's criminal activities was slow but ultimately successful. Federal prosecutors were able to trace most of the money he had stolen, and restitution payments have gradually restored their financial security. More importantly, their understanding of how they were victimized has helped them rebuild their relationship with me based on genuine knowledge of who I am rather than assumptions about who I was supposed to be. Sarah and I have built a marriage strengthened by the trials we weathered before our wedding. She has become an active participant in the Legal Defense Fund's work, using her background in psychology to develop support programs for family members affected by false accusation cases. Her initial doubt about my innocence, which once felt like betrayal, has become a source of strength as she helps other spouses and partners navigate similar situations. I learned that love means believing in someone's character even when external pressure makes doubt seem reasonable. She reflected during a recent interview for a legal journal article about the fund's work. "The people we love deserve our trust, especially when others are trying to destroy it." Marcus served 2.5 years of his 8-year sentence before being released to a halfway house for good behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs. His transformation during incarceration was genuine, but incomplete, marked by sincere remorse, but also ongoing struggle with the narcissistic patterns that had driven his criminal behavior. Our first meeting after his release was emotionally charged but ultimately productive. He had used his time in prison to complete a bachelor's degree and earn certification as a financial fraud counselor, planning to dedicate his life to helping others avoid the mistakes he had made. His apology was specific and complete, acknowledging not just his crimes but the deeper patterns of jealousy and need for control that had motivated them. I spent my whole life believing that your success somehow diminished mine, Marcus told me during that conversation. I couldn't see that there was room for both of us to achieve different things in different ways. I hope I can spend the rest of my life proving that I've learned better. The process of rebuilding our relationship will take years and may never fully restore the brotherhood we lost. But I've chosen to give Marcus the opportunity to prove he can change, partly because forgiveness is important for my own healing, and partly because our family needs to model the possibility of redemption for our children who will inherit the consequences of our choices. Judge Williams has become an informal mentor, meeting with me quarterly to discuss my cases and my work with the Legal Defense Fund. Her recognition of my work in her courtroom during the Fitzgerald case was the turning point that saved my career, and her continued support has opened doors throughout the California legal community. You've taken a terrible experience and transformed it into a force for justice, she told me during our most recent conversation. That's the mark of someone who understands that personal trials can become sources of strength for helping others. The fund has also become a platform for advocating systemic reforms to professional licensing and disciplinary processes. We've worked with state bar associations, medical boards, and teaching credential committees to develop better procedures for investigating accusations that may be motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate professional concerns. Our recommendations include requirements for investigators to examine the relationship between accusers and accused professionals' standards for evaluating the credibility of family member complaints, and protection procedures for professionals whose careers are threatened by malicious allegations. Several states have adopted modified versions of our proposed reforms, creating safeguards that should prevent others from enduring what I experienced. The most meaningful recognition came last month when the American Bar Association presented me with their Young Lawyer Public Service Award for my work with the Defense Fund. The ceremony was attended by judges, attorneys, and clients whose lives had been affected by our work, creating a community of people committed to protecting professional integrity while maintaining accountability. Standing at the podium to accept the award, I thought about that October morning when Marcus's lies had seemed destined to destroy everything I had worked to build. The journey from that moment of despair to this recognition of service had taught me lessons about resilience, family, and justice that no law school could have provided. Every professional who faces false accusations, I told the audience, needs to know that maintaining integrity under pressure isn't just about surviving the immediate crisis. It's about building the character and reputation that will ultimately prove stronger than any lie. As I conclude this story, I want to share the most important lessons I've learned from this experience. First, success often inspires jealousy, even from family members who should celebrate your achievements. The people closest to you may become your harshest critics if your accomplishments challenge their assumptions about family dynamics or personal worth. Second, maintaining integrity during false accusations requires patience, faith in truth, and support from people who know your character. The temptation to fight lies with aggression or to compromise your values for short-term advantage must be resisted because your response to crisis defines who you become afterward. Third, families can survive even devastating betrayals if all parties commit to honest self-examination and genuine change. Forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, but it does require choosing hope over bitterness and growth over revenge. Finally, personal trials can become sources of strength for helping others if we choose to transform our pain into purpose. The worst experiences of our lives can become the foundation for our most meaningful contributions if we maintain perspective and commitment to service. I think about these lessons every day as I practice law work with the Defense Fund and build my marriage and family relationships. The boy who laid concrete to pay for college and the young lawyer who nearly lost everything to his brother's lies have both contributed to who I am now, someone who understands that integrity is tested not by easy success, but by how we respond when everything we've built is threatened by forces beyond our control. The truth will eventually emerge, but only if we have the courage to maintain our principles while we wait for justice. That courage isn't something we're born with. It's something we develop through practice, support, and faith that doing the right thing ultimately leads to the right outcomes, even when the path is longer and more difficult than we expected. Have you ever faced a situation where family members doubted your achievements or success? How did you handle their skepticism? And what would you do differently if you could go back? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below, because understanding how families navigate success and jealousy can help all of us build stronger, more supportive relationships. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more accounts of overcoming family challenges and professional obstacles. Share it with anyone who might be dealing with similar situations, because sometimes knowing that others have survived and thrived after betrayal can provide the hope needed to keep moving forward. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most difficult periods of my life. I hope my experience can help you navigate your own challenges with greater wisdom and confidence, knowing that integrity and perseverance ultimately triumph over lies and jealousy, even when the victory takes longer than we hope. Remember that your worth isn't determined by others' ability to believe in you, but by your commitment to becoming the person you're meant to be, regardless of the obstacles placed in your path. Keep building, keep growing, and keep believing in the power of truth to eventually overcome any deception.